Now, MSNBC continues to lean forward towards corporatism. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, the so-called liberal station ended up cutting off a live Bernie Sanders press conference in favor of a Republican as soon as he started talking about his opposition to the TPP. Let's take a look at that. We'll talk about it.
We have lost millions of decent paying jobs which have ravaged community after community after community all over this country. The average American who walks into a store now finds it harder and harder to purchase products made in America, and often the only alternative is made in China or someplace else. Now, on that issue, I voted against NAFTA, against CAFTA, against permanent normal trade relations with China, and I am helping to lead the opposition to the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
We've been listening to Bernie Sanders, less of a news conference, more of a speech in Boston. They're drawing contrast with Hillary Clinton. I want to turn back to the Republican side of things because we have some breaking news to report. We had told you last hour that we were going to be talking to Rick Tyler, the spokesman for the Cruz campaign.
You're listening to Bernie Sanders, but we got to cut away now because it's less of a press conference and more of a speech. And now that he's talking about TPP, we're gonna cut away. Let's go to the Republican side. Let's talk about Republicans instead of a massively important trade deal that will affect 40% of the world's economy. Cut away, cut away, cut away. Curious timing, isn't it? Let's go to the Republicans. Let's go to the Republicans. And look, I know I sound conspiratorial. I know, right? At home, you might be like, come on, dude, take off your tinfoil hat. It's not a conspiracy. No, but remember, MSNBC owner Comcast has actually lobbied in favor of the TPP. And I've got some more facts that show that it's not as conspiratorial as it sounds. So, why? Why did he lobby? Well, there's that merger, Comcast, Time Warner, that might be approved. Now remember, they were blocked from merging, but under the agreement, corporations would be able to sue nations over regulatory rules that might impede future profits. Now, that system is used under a tribunal of private lawyers. Now, these lawyers sit outside the normal domestic legal system. So they're completely outside the system, right? So if Comcast runs into a rule or a regulation under the TPP that will impact their future profits, then I can only imagine the whole point of trying to acquire Time Warner was that, hey, we're going to make a shit ton of money off this deal. They got blocked, but if TPP goes through, they might be able to go through it again, and this time get the merger approved by suing the United States in court. Now, using these, of course, private tribunals. Now, according to the Washington Post, these tribunals are made from highly paid corporate lawyers that would go back and forth between representing corporations one day and sitting in judgment of them the next day. Now, I want to ask you a question. If these lawyers, which, by the way, are hired corporate lawyers, that can also be a judge the next day, you don't think you're going to buy off these lawyers? And if you're one of the lawyers, what are you going to do? Are you going to rule against a corporation that could hire you tomorrow? Come on, man. Come on, come on. This is a huge boon to large multinational corporations, like Comcast, who, of course, as I said, owns MSNBC. Does it seem a little curious that they would cut away from any sort of mentions of TPP? Okay, say you're not convinced. You're not convinced, right? So let me get some more arguments in favor of this, right? So, when it comes to people knowing about the deal, well, the less people know about the deal, the better it is for these companies that are pushing it. The more we know, well, the more there's opposition. And of course, guess who's in favor of informing the public? Right, the same media corporations that are going to make millions of dollars off of this trade deal. Look, the whole point of a media is to cover what's going on in the news, stuff that's going to affect you. A trade deal that deals with 40% of the world's economy is a big fucking deal, and yet they've done a completely dismal job at covering it. In fact, a Media Matters study found that outside of Ed Schultz's show, which was pulled, by the way, due to low ratings, and some people are saying that it's related to his opposition to the TPP. I don't know if that's true or not, but I hear a lot of people saying that. The TPP, outside of his show, was only mentioned twice on MSNBC during an 18-month period. That's a year and a half of not saying anything about one of the biggest trade deals in history. Curious? Last year, MSNBC host Joe Scarborough admitted to The Intercept that his network was, quote, guilty of ignoring the TPP. Quote, there hasn't been, and by the way, Scarborough said this while kind of yucking it up, kind of laughing about it, right? Says, quote, Richard Haass brought this up. He came on the set, president of the Council on Foreign Relations. He said he wanted to talk about this. And I poked him and I said, come on, let's talk about the new Star Wars trailer instead. So I'm laughing because you're talking about that, and I've got to count myself sort of guilty on that front, but I do think we're going to talk about it a lot more. Yes. And did they? Not so much. Now, he also added his own opposition to the deal. Quote, I think it does put a lot of American workers at a disadvantage. I have no problem with free trade, and I'm inclined for free trade. But people have bowed at the altar of free trade as if it's some sort of sacrosanct issue that you can never cross or question. I just don't believe in blind free trade. Now, could his opposition be that he actually believes that this is a bad deal, or because it's President Obama doing it? You always have to question their partisan motives, right? But regardless of that, Scarborough said, let's talk about Star Wars instead. Hey man, I like Star Wars. You see me rocking some Star Wars shirts on the show, but I also like having clean air and clean water. And the TPP will allow corporations to sue countries, governments, over environmental regulations. Why don't you have some priorities, Joe? Why doesn't the media have priorities? Well, it turns out their priority seems to be to let it go, to not educate people about the implications of this trade deal, to not even talk about it. And the fact is, as I said, the media has completely failed to talk about the TPP. Because at the end of the day, they're not beholden to the truth anymore. They're beholden to their corporate executives, their shareholders, and their profits. And they don't want to do anything to challenge that.